You were never supposed to know. That's what she uttered. 7 syllables that seemed to drain all the color from the morning. The ceramic mug, clutched too tightly, slipped from my grasp, shattering on the cool kitchen tiles, a chorus of sharp fragments mirroring the ache in my chest. Her lips quivered, yet her eyes remained dry, distant. Mine, however, welled up, a sudden, unwanted spring. I stood there, a brittle, parchment-thin letter in my hand. It was creased, yellowed, and marred by what I now suspected were not wine stains, but tears. I'd stumbled upon it tucked inside an old, rarely opened book on cultivating perennials, a volume she hadn't touched in years. My intent was innocent, simply searching for tips to rescue our ailing hydrangeas. Never did I imagine unearthing this. The address was clear. To Callum. The script, unmistakably hers with those distinctive Ys, looped like tiny, elegant fishing hooks. The letter bore the date June 1987, a decade into our marriage. It began benignly enough, a tender recollection of dancing barefoot in a summer storm. But then, the tone shifted abruptly. You vowed to wait an eternity. But I cannot leave him yet. I owe him at least a few more years. I reread that damning sentence until the words blurred into an illegible smear. Who was Callum? And who was him? Flipping the page, I found more. A deluge of confessions, poignant regrets, broken promises, and stark mentions of weekends she'd purportedly spent with her sister, or business trips that now screamed of fabrication. This wasn't a solitary confession. It was a carefully concealed dossier. Another letter, then 5 more. A tight bundle secured with twine, hidden for decades amidst the dusty pages of a guide to soil composition. That night, food turned to ash in my mouth. Each breath felt like an uphill climb. I lay beside her, feigning sleep, my mind a relentless carousel of doubt. Had the woman I cherished been merely a carefully constructed facade, designed solely for my benefit? The following morning, I laid the damning letters on the kitchen table, a silent accusation. She entered, still in her dressing gown, humming a forgotten jingle, her eyes vacant. Then they landed on the bundle. Her humming ceased. She didn't reach for them. She simply froze, a statue cast in sudden dread. Then came her whisper, devoid of surprise, thick with resignation. You were never supposed to know. And in that brutal instant, I understood. The truth wasn't a sudden revelation. It had always been there. A silent predator, patient and buried beneath 37 years of meticulously woven deceit. What she unveiled next didn't just unravel our union. It decimated my very understanding of the man I had believed myself to be throughout my entire existence. Ready to uncover the hidden truths lurking beneath seemingly perfect lives? The very air seemed to crackle and die when Lenora whispered, You were never supposed to know. The world outside, the neighbor's hound barking, the kettle's frantic whistle, faded into a meaningless hum. My gaze fixated on her, searching for fear, for regret, but finding only a profound weariness, as if this moment had been a long-anticipated destination, and she was simply too exhausted to prolong the journey. She made no move for the letters, offered no protest. Instead, she moved past me with an unnerving calm, opening the drawer of the old hutch where we kept a miscellany of forgotten things. Paper clips, faded coupons, pens long dead. From its depths, she retrieved something I hadn't laid eyes on in decades. A small, tarnished silver key, not a modern key card, but a weighty, old-fashioned brass key with a worn tag. Suite 206, the Havenbrook Inn. The name resonated instantly. The Havenbrook Inn. It was where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary, a quaint place I remembered for its faded floral wallpaper, the slightly askew chandelier, and her infectious laughter when the power briefly flickered during dinner. I'd cherished it as one of the most romantic nights of my life. Now the cruel irony struck. It had been romantic for her too, but for entirely different, devastating reasons. Callum, she finally articulated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was my first love. I met him before you. We weren't truly over when I met you. I convinced myself I could choose stability, security, that letting go of that kind of passion was simply a part of growing up. I sat in a stupor, listening as she confessed to sporadic encounters over the course of our marriage. Just once or twice, she insisted, always during periods of strain or difficulty between us. She framed it as a quest for closure, but who, I wondered, truly needs 37 years for closure? Think about that for a second. 37 years for closure. Does that sound like a relationship ending? Or a life being lived on the side? She admitted to penning unsent letters to him, then reluctantly clarified that some had been replies, that they'd met again in 2005, then 2011, and most recently in 2019, at the funeral of someone I hadn't even known she was acquainted with. My hands trembled, the ability to speak completely stolen from me. I pushed away from the table, backing away as if she were a dangerous intruder in my own home. A relentless question hammered at me. How could I have been so blind? How could such an enormous secret be meticulously hidden, right under my nose for nearly 4 decades? How could I have shared a life, children, a mortgage, with someone who was simultaneously crafting an entirely separate narrative? She followed me into the hallway, attempting to explain, not to justify, but to clarify. It was then I noticed her hand. The ring I'd slipped onto her finger in 1986, the one I'd had resized after our second child arrived, still adorned her left hand. It was the same ring I'd seen her nervously twist countless times over trivial lies, where she'd placed her keys, whether she'd eaten the last cookie. Now a chilling realization dawned. How many of those small moments were truly about cookies or keys at all? There were no shouts, no thrown objects, not even tears. I simply walked out the front door and sank into my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, the engine silent for 5 agonizing hours. I had no destination. Worse, I didn't even know who I was, either with her or, perhaps, without her. And then the messages began to arrive, from an unknown number, from Callum. The first buzz vibrated my phone at 2:17 a.m., just as exhaustion threatened to pull me into a fitful sleep, parked on the lonely edge of a grocery store lot. I glanced at the screen, expecting a spam alert or a late-night news update. Instead, a number without a name. The message: "You deserve the truth, Everett. I always thought she'd tell you." I reread it 5 times, my brain struggling to process the impossible. There was no need to question the sender. No one else would address me as Everett. Not like that. Not gently. Not with a tone implying a shared, painful understanding. Or worse, pity. A cold vice tightened around my chest. My thumbs hovered, trembling, but I couldn't respond. I simply stared at the words glowing eerily in the pre-dawn darkness. Minutes crawled by. Then another message. "This wasn't how I wanted you to find out. I never hated you, and I envied you." Envy. The word scorched me. What could he possibly envy? The man who shared her bed while he, Callum, haunted her heart like an insistent ghost? Was it for being the sturdy framework she built her life around, while secretly feeding him letters, memories, and whispered apologies? Finally, I typed, "Leave me alone." He didn't. The next message arrived a few hours later. It was a photograph, grainy, black and white, clearly an old scanned image. I hesitated, a wave of nausea washing over me, before forcing myself to open it. There she was, my Lenora, barefoot in a hotel corridor, head thrown back in genuine laughter, arms entwined around a man whose face I'd never seen in person, yet could now never unsee. Callum, tall, dark-haired, a wide, confident grin, a confidence I realized I'd never truly possessed. The timestamp read October 2005, the same week Lenora had supposedly flown to assist her sister with a minor surgery. I distinctly remembered purchasing her plane ticket myself. Can you imagine finding a photo like this? How long does it take to truly process a betrayal that's been hiding in plain sight for decades? I slammed the phone against the steering wheel. The horn blared, a jarring cry that startled me nearly out of my skin in the empty lot. Rage surged, but it was overshadowed by something far more potent: humiliation. For 37 years, I had played the devoted husband, blissfully unaware I was merely filling the void left by another man. I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt utterly erased. And then came the final, most devastating blow that night. Callum sent one last message. No photo, no explanation, just three stark words. Ask her about Colorado, 1992. Colorado, Lenora had never once mentioned Colorado. That was the year our second child was born, the year I underwent knee surgery, the year I nearly lost my job during a brutal round of layoffs. She had been my unwavering pillar, holding our world together, or so I had fervently believed. Now I had to know. I needed to hear it from her lips. I drove home as the sun began to paint the sky. With every mile closer to the house, my skin prickled with an unbearable itch. When I pushed open the front door, she was already on the couch, dressed, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She offered no inquiry about my absence. Her gaze met mine, and she simply stated, her voice quiet, "He told you about Colorado, didn't he?" I didn't answer. I sank onto the chair opposite her and managed, "Tell me everything." And what she proceeded to tell me made the past 37 years feel like a life lived by a stranger. There were no tears, no pleas, no attempts at denial. When I demanded an explanation for Colorado, she merely folded her hands in her lap, like a schoolgirl preparing to recite a rehearsed passage. Her voice held no drama, no discernible emotion, no tremor, no pause for breath, just facts, cold, sterile, and sharper than any words I had ever known. In 1992, I went to Colorado to end things with Callum, she declared. But I didn't. My stomach churned. That was the year our daughter entered the world. The year I'd been laid off, consumed by the gnawing fear of failing as a husband and father, while she, apparently, was reigniting something with a man whose very existence was alien to me. She recounted booking the trip under the guise of visiting an old college friend. The memory clicked into place. She was gone for 4 days. I'd stayed home with our son, my knee still swollen from surgery, feeding him canned soup, mumbling apologies for being too exhausted to build blanket forts. She had returned, smiling, bringing a souvenir snow globe I hadn't even requested. Now I knew. There had been no friend. She'd met Callum in a rented cabin outside Aspen. They spent the entire trip talking, she claimed, but her voice faltered, a slight, almost imperceptible crack. It was the first fissure in her composure, and I latched onto it, a drowning man grabbing a fragile branch. I asked if they had slept together. She offered no verbal reply, only a single, small nod. It was a tiny movement, yet it struck me with the force of a hammer blow to the ribs. Air caught in my throat. For a sickening moment, I thought I might vomit, and then she spoke again, her words twisting the knife even deeper. "I almost didn't come back, Everett. I almost stayed there. We talked about it, about starting over, but he said I wasn't ready to leave you. And he was right." That sentence didn't just shatter me because she considered leaving, or even because she was unfaithful. It was because he was the one who decided I still held some value, not her. I wasn't her choice. I was her compromise. What would you do if you found out your entire relationship was someone else's compromise? She continued, explaining that Callum had always been the what if in her life, the road not taken. And when life became difficult, when we argued, when we faced financial struggles, when I retreated into long hours and unspoken resentment, she wrote to him, sometimes just in a notebook, sometimes by mail, sometimes they met. "Did you ever love me?" The question escaped my lips, an unintended wounded breath. Her answer came swiftly. "I did. I do. But not the way you love me." And that was it. That was the precise moment I understood I had spent nearly 4 decades offering a love she could never fully embrace. I had given her stability, loyalty, everything I believed truly mattered, while she had yearned for something else entirely. She accepted my love, but never reciprocated it in the same measure. I was a chapter she never intended to write, but kept editing out of a profound, lingering guilt. I rose, my legs feeling like rubber, my chest hollowed out. I told her I needed air, but I didn't go outside. I retreated to the garage, finding solace on the old workbench amidst forgotten tools, staring blankly at the concrete floor for hours. That night I didn't sleep in our bed. I didn't speak to her. I simply saw that nod again, her silent admission, her almost, her decision not to choose me. And I knew the damage was already too deep, not because of what she did, but because of everything she almost did. The garage air was frigid that night, but its chill was lost on me. I sat motionless, surrounded by forgotten paint cans, broken screwdrivers, and 1,000 ghosts of a man who believed he lived a happy life. Her words relentlessly replayed in my mind, a relentless splinter I couldn't extract. I loved you, but not the way you love me. What was I supposed to do with that? Frame it? Burn it? Etch it across the ruins of my heart? I didn't return inside until sunrise. The kitchen was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator. She hadn't slept either. Her rumpled clothes from yesterday were a testament to that. Her hands were clasped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. We sat in silence, two strangers who had once pledged a lifetime, now sharing only the deafening absence of words. Eventually, she broke the quiet. "You were my safe harbor, Everett, my anchor." I looked up, my eyes hollow. "You mean I was your backup plan?" She flinched but offered no denial. Instead, she uttered words I doubt I will ever truly recover from. "He was fire. You were shelter. I needed both, but I could only ever truly have one." I felt as though I'd just been told I was the life raft while she mourned the shipwreck, that our entire marriage had been a prolonged attempt to convince herself she could be content with comfort over chaos, that I was merely plan B. I asked her why she stayed, why she hadn't left when she had the chance, when she'd met Callum in Colorado, when she'd kissed him in those clandestine hotel parking lots. Her answer was chilling in its simplicity. "Because you never gave me a reason to." That was the cruelest cut of all. I never cheated. I never abandoned her. I never raised a hand, never screamed, never even threatened divorce during our fiercest arguments. I worked tirelessly, came home exhausted, brought her coffee in the mornings. I loved her. I trusted her. And somehow in her eyes that made me invisible. Here's what no one tells you about unwavering loyalty. Sometimes it's mistaken for apathy. Later that day, I ascended to the attic. It had been years since I'd ventured up there. I wasn't sure what I sought. Perhaps a reason. Perhaps a place to unleash a primal scream where no one could hear. But instead I discovered something else. A box, not the shoebox from before. This was newer, tucked neatly behind an ancient suitcase. Inside lay journals. Hers. Dozens of them. Pages upon pages of feelings she'd never once spoken aloud. Notes about me, about Callum, about the lies she told, and the guilt she buried. And one sentence, circled in ink so many times the paper was nearly torn through. "I keep choosing him out of duty and convincing myself it's love." Duty. That's what I had become. A mere obligation. A man who meant well, but who never made her heart race. I had always believed love was meant to be steady. I thought passion naturally waned, replaced by respect, by care, by companionship. Clearly, I had profoundly misunderstood the assignment. When I descended, there was no yelling. I didn't even bring up the journals. I simply told her I needed space, that I would be staying with my brother for a while. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't cry. She didn't run after me like a scene from a tragic movie. She just nodded, her voice quiet. "Take whatever time you need." And in that moment, I finally knew. She had already let go long before I had even realized I was still holding on. I moved into Elias's spare room that very evening. The place smelled of motor oil and microwave burritos, but at least mercifully it didn't carry the scent of her perfume. I thought the distance would help. I imagined separation might dull the persistent ache, grant me space to breathe again. But it didn't feel like breathing. It felt like drowning, excruciatingly slow. My brother Elias attempted to be supportive in his own clumsy way. He offered me beer, the TV remote, and advice that invariably concluded with, "Just let it go, man." He didn't understand. How could he? He'd been divorced twice and never stayed with anyone long enough to build a life. let alone witness one unravel. 2 days into my stay, a package arrived. No note, no return address, just a plain brown padded envelope slid under Elias's front door. Inside was a USB drive. Now I'm far from tech savvy. I still double-click icons like it's 1998. But curiosity, I've learned, is a cruel master, and pain, a surprisingly addictive companion. So I plugged it into Elias's ancient laptop and waited. One folder appeared, unlabeled. Within it, 9 video files, each titled simply with a date. The first bore the year 2003. I clicked play. It was Lenora, not the recent Lenora, but younger, radiant, sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room, her hair pulled up, legs crossed, speaking directly into the camera as if making a confession. I could hear Callum's voice, smooth, unbothered, the voice of a man who understood his forbidden role, yet stubbornly refused to accept its limits. "Tell me again," he coaxed. Lenora laughed softly, almost nervously, then whispered, "I can't stop thinking about you. Even when I'm with him." I paused the video. My hands were shaking uncontrollably again, but I forced myself to click the next file, then the next. Different years, different cities. Her face aged with each video, yet always illuminated by a glow I hadn't witnessed in her for years. Some were simply her talking. Others showed them walking through unfamiliar streets, laughing with an uninhibited joy. None of it was explicit, but every single frame tore me apart more brutally than any direct confession of infidelity ever could. It wasn't the affair itself. It was the sheer, undeniable joy. She had loved him, not merely in theory, not as a phantom or a distant fantasy. She had chosen him again and again, even as she remained married to me and Callum. He had meticulously documented every fragment of her he had stolen. The final video was dated just 2 months ago. She was sitting in our bedroom. The same bedding, the same wallpaper, the same nightstand I had built with my own hands. Callum's voice was quiet. "Do you think you'll ever tell him?" Lenora hesitated, then whispered, "If I do, it'll be the end." I snapped the laptop shut. My chest felt like it was caving in. She had known this truth was a ticking bomb, and still she had nurtured it, fed it, protected it. And I had been living with a woman who mourned the prospect of honesty with me because it would mean losing the man she only kept around for his perceived stability. That night, sleep was impossible. I couldn't shake the image of every smile she'd ever given me, wondering if each one was truly meant for him. I endlessly replayed every minor argument, every quiet Sunday, every time she'd said, "I'm just tired tonight," and asked myself if it was because her heart had been miles away. This is what happens when silence becomes complicity. The next morning I drove home, not to scream, not to fight. I needed to look her in the eyes and ask the question that had grown louder than all the others. "Why didn't you leave me?" Her answer, I knew, would rewrite everything I thought I knew about our shared history. When I stepped back into our house, nothing outwardly appeared different. Yet everything felt irrevocably wrong. The curtains were open, just as she preferred. The lamp on the side table was still slightly askew due to its uneven base. Dishes were air drying on the rack, undeniable proof that life had continued its steady march in my absence. But it wasn't life, it was merely routine. She was in the living room, folding laundry, a picture of unnerving calm. She didn't flinch when she saw me. She didn't rush to offer apologies. She simply stated, "I wondered how long it would take you to come back." That single sentence ignited a fire in my chest. I sat across from her, and before my nerve could completely abandon me, I asked, "Why didn't you leave me, Lenora? All those years, all those chances. Why not just go?" She folded a towel with meticulous precision, as if its creases held more significance than my agonizing question. Then she looked up, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't anticipated. Exhaustion. Not guilt, not fear, just profound fatigue. "Because you made life too easy, Everett," she said quietly. "You were always kind, predictable. You never questioned. You made dinner on Tuesdays. You filled the gas tank in my car without me ever having to ask. You never gave me a reason to leave, but you also never truly gave me a reason to stay. The words landed like a blow I hadn't seen coming. She continued, you were safe, and safe became comfortable, and then comfort became guilt. By the time I truly realized I was living in the wrong story, it felt too late to change the ending. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rail at her for twisting my unwavering loyalty into some kind of fatal flaw. But all I could do was sit there and let the truth settle. You were in love with him, I stated, more an affirmation than a question. She nodded, a gesture that filled me with dread. Callum was chaos. He made me feel alive and terrified all at once. But he didn't offer stability. He didn't offer a home. You did. So I was your shelter again, I whispered, the bitterness thick and acrid in my throat. You were my safety net, the life I could always count on. And I hated myself for needing that more than passion. That's why I never told you. I thought if I buried it deep enough, it wouldn't grow roots. But it did. I stood, my heart hammered against my ribs, my legs suddenly weak. Do you know what it feels like to realize your entire marriage was just a backup plan? That I was merely a soft place to land when you were done chasing the man who truly made your heart race? Her eyes welled with tears, but I felt nothing. I didn't want to see her cry. I wanted to see her regret. I never meant to hurt you, she murmured. But that's the insidious nature of betrayal. It's rarely a single intentional act. It's a slow, quiet erosion, built moment by moment on decisions too small to notice until they coalesce into something permanent and irreversible. Before I left the room, I turned to her one last time and asked, if he had ever asked you to leave with him, would you have gone? She didn't answer, not immediately, but silence is an answer, and hers echoed louder than any truth she had ever spoken. I didn't pack much when I finally left for good. Just a suitcase, my journals, and a box of old family photos that still held meaning, even if the story they told had been irrevocably altered. I didn't slam the door. I didn't deliver a dramatic final speech. I simply walked out, and I didn't look back. Because the person I had spent my life with was already behind me, emotionally, spiritually, and in every way that truly mattered. The initial weeks were a raw, open wound. I felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped out my very core. I'd wake up in Elias's guest room, disoriented, convinced I was home, expecting Lenore to be humming in the kitchen, the kettle whistling, but she wasn't. And strangely, a quiet sense of acceptance began to settle in. The turning point arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a coffee shop I'd never visited before. I was scribbling thoughts in a worn notebook, attempting to make sense of the emotional wreckage, when a woman at the adjacent table leaned over and asked if I was writing a book. I laughed, a genuine, unforced sound I hadn't heard from myself in months. Her name was Maeve. She was a retired librarian, divorced, and possessed a wonderfully wicked sense of humor. We talked for hours that day about music, about the curious process of growing older, about the strange, exhilarating freedom that emerges when you lose everything you thought you needed. I'm not suggesting it was love at first sight. What I'm saying is that it was something even more profound. It was possibility at first sight. It made me realize that my years with Lenora weren't entirely wasted. They taught me what I truly needed, what I could no longer accept, and most importantly, what I truly deserved. And perhaps she was right in one regard. I did make life easy, but now I crave a life that is meaningful, even if it's messy, even if it's wonderfully unpredictable. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. There were no bitter arguments, no custody battles, no screaming matches over antique furniture, just the quiet, almost solemn closing of a chapter that, in hindsight, was never truly mine to begin with. Now at 66, I'm embarking on a new beginning. I bought a used Jeep, moved into a small townhouse near a winding hiking trail, and I'm planning a trip to Alaska, something I'd always dreamed of but never pursued because it never fit the schedule. And you know what? For the first time in decades, I feel truly, vibrantly alive. If you've journeyed with me to the end of this story, thank you. I hope you take one truth with you. It's never too late to demand more from your life. You are not too old to rewrite your narrative. And sometimes the most agonizing truths are the very catalyst for the most powerful, liberating freedom.